Karşıyaka. I'm a senior researcher in migration and human rights studies. I'll be moderating this session and look forward to fostering a dialogue that highlights challenges and identifies solutions, ensuring that no one is left behind in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So today, we are honored to have distinguished speakers and panelists with us. Allow me to briefly introduce them. His Excellency Taha Ayhan, President of the Islamic Cooperation Youth Forum. His Excellency Ambassador Hamid Opolayero, Permanent Observer of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the United Nations. His Excellency Adil Çalışkan, Deputy Minister of Family and Social Services of the Republic of Turkey. Dr. Sandra Pertek will join us soon. She is the director of from the University of Birmingham, and we have Miss Bella Sullivan here with us, director of the McGill Youth Advisory Delegation, and also His Excellency Philip Pollier from the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs will be joining us soon. I'd like to thank you for joining us in this endeavor. Now it's my privilege to invite our distinguished speakers to deliver their welcoming remarks. First, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Taha Ayhan, President of the Islamic Cooperation Youth Forum, to share his perspectives and to set the tone for today's important dialogue.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dear Excellencies, dear ladies, dear gentlemen, thank you very much for being here with us in this cold afternoon of New York. His Excellency Adil Çalışkan Bey, His Excellency Ambassador Hamid Opolayero, Dr. Pertek, and Ms. Sullivan, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, honorable panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to welcome all of you to this important gathering at the 36th session of the Commission for Social Development. Allow me to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, our valued partner in this event and our mother organization, for its continued leadership and unwavering support to the youth in addressing the challenges faced by youth in conflict-affected regions. Today, we are here to talk about an issue that is not just urgent but deeply personal for millions of people around the world: the impact of conflict on the children, youth, and girls. Around the world, conflicts continue to destroy lives, fracture communities, and push millions into cycles of poverty and displacement. When we think about war or conflict, we often focus on political consequences, military strategies, or peace negotiations, but behind every conflict, there are human stories. Children who have lost access to education, young people whose futures have been put on hold, and girls who faced additional layers of vulnerability. The damage goes beyond the visible destruction of cities and infrastructure. It lingers in the form of lost opportunities, broken dreams, and the deep scars that take generations to heal. At ICYF, we refuse to accept conflict as just another tragic reality. Young people are not just victims. They are leaders, change makers, and problem solvers, in fact. Their resilience, creativity, and leadership are key to rebuilding societies, fostering peace, and driving sustainable development. Given the right support, they can be the driving force behind restoring hope and creating a future that is more just, inclusive, and resilient. Islamic Cooperation Youth Forum, as an organization with the ECOSOC-consultative status, actively engages in United Nations platforms to amplify the voice of young people. Through this status, we organize events and initiatives that bring youth perspectives to the forefront of global discussions. This platform allows us to ensure that the needs, aspirations, and contributions of young people, especially those affected by conflict area, are recognized and addressed in the international arena. However, no conversation about conflict and its devastating impact can be complete without acknowledging the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Palestine, especially in Gaza. For decades, Palestinian youth have faced immense hardships, from displacement and loss of basic rights to denial of opportunities for education and economic participation. Their resilience in the face of adversity is a testament to their strength and determination. Islamic Cooperation Youth Forum, ICYF, stands in unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people, youth of Gaza, advocating for their rights, dignity, and self-determination. Through the dedicated programs, international awareness campaigns, and institutional partnerships, we continue to elevate their voices in global discussions, ensuring that their struggle for justice remains at the forefront of international discourse. As young leaders and global stakeholders, we must reaffirm our commitment to peace, justice, and human dignity for all, including the people of Palestine, on the basis of international law and humanitarian law. But no organization, no government, no single institution can tackle these challenges alone, especially in the current circumstances that's becoming harder day by day. It takes collective action. This event is about bringing together the people who have the knowledge, experience, and influence to make a real difference. It's about finding solutions, not just policies, but real tangible actions that change lives. I want to thank all of our distinguished speakers, panelists, and especially the audience for being here today. Your insights, experiences, and dedication are what will make this discussion meaningful. I hope today's conversation sparks new collaborations and leads to impactful initiatives that support the millions of young people affected by conflict. Once again, welcome, and I look forward to an inspiring and productive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your insightful and inspiring words. It's crucial to acknowledge the devastating impacts of conflicts around the world, including the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Palestine and Gaza. The resilience of youth in these regions, despite facing unimaginable challenges, reminds us the urgency to act and to ensure that their voices are not only heard, but also translated into meaningful action. Now it's my honor to invite His Excellency Ambassador Hamid Opoleyeru, Permanent Observer of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the United Nations, to deliver his welcoming speech.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, I have the honor to welcome you also to this side event, which is co-organized by the General Secretariat of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Islamic Cooperation Youth Forum, which is known as ICYF, on the margins of the 63rd United Nations Commission for Social Development. Of course, you know about the theme, and I want to also emphasize that both the OIC and the ICYF are engaged in supporting the objectives of the United Nations in addressing challenges militating against the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is already in its midterm. The goals are supposed to be fully addressed by the year 2030. So there's no doubt that achieving the inclusive socio-economic development is contingent on addressing the challenges posed by the consequences of war and man-made crises on the human population, particularly the vulnerable segments. The destruction of lives and livelihood occasioned by the various wars and political crises in our countries has largely contributed to the minimum achievements made on SDG targets, rated at 17% in 2024. Consequently, the involvement of children in warfare is evident in the recent reports on the huge number of child soldiers, numbering about 300,000, 40% of which are girls. This recruitment of children in war is contrary to all international conventions and legal instruments, including the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989, and the OIC Covenant on the Rights of the Child, 2004, which emphasize protection of children against violence and warfare. Beyond forced recruitment of children as perpetrators of armed conflict, the various international conventions are unanimous on the protection of women and children from being victims of armed conflict. So in this regard, the colossal damage to educational and health facilities, the displacement of population, and the socio-cultural dislocation of children and family members, as well as the gender-based violence, they all produce socio-economic dislocation of great magnitude. And this is on account of wars and armed conflict. So, Your Excellencies, as we look forward at today's event to the details of the various approaches of the United Nations and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation towards mitigating the effects of war on women and children, it is important to stress that these approaches are mutually reinforcing. They reflect the organic partnership between the United Nations and the regional organizations based on the principle of subsidiarity. The general thrust of these responses includes the far-reaching actions of promoting gender equality and empowerment of women and children as contained in the Pact for the Future. Other responses feature addressing impact of violence on women and children and vulnerable groups, including effects on civilian infrastructure and cultural heritage, as well as counter-terrorism. So the Pact for the Future also enjoined investment in socio-economic development of children and young people in order to attain their full potentials. So hitherto, the UN commitment to women empowerment in the area of science was evident in the declaration of 11 February as International Day of Women and Girls. This day was just commemorated 2 days ago in the UN headquarters. In their respective messages to the occasion, the UN and OIC considered the participation of women and girls as essential to building a better world through science and technology, calling for increased number of women in the global scientific community. In the domain of women empowerment in general terms, the OIC Program of Action accorded priority to its 9 thematic areas as contained in the OIC Plan of Action for Advancement of Women, known as OPAO. This includes the issue of involving women in decision-making, according equal opportunities to education, health, employment, social protection, and protection against violence and armed conflict. It's encouraging that several OIC specialized and affiliated institutions, such as ICYF, are engaged in programs that prioritize the capacity development of women and youth in the various sectors of socio-economic development. The youth volunteering and the entrepreneurship programs of ICYF and the technical and vocational education and training of the Islamic Development Bank are critical to the success stories of OIC in this domain. It's therefore my hope that discussions today will enrich the ongoing discourse and actions on the inclusive participation of women and youth in peace building, conflict prevention, and pro-conflict rehabilitation and recovery. I wish this event a great success. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your thoughtful and motivating address. With these powerful opening remarks, let us now turn to our panel discussion. It's my honor to invite His Excellency Adil Çalışkan, Deputy Minister of Family and Social Services of the Republic of Turkey, to share his perspectives. The floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. This is the special day of Muslims and Islamic world. We set Berat night. I congratulate all of you this night. Distinguished guests, it is the privilege to engage with this distinguished gathering to discuss how we can safeguard the future of the children, youth, and the girls in conflict and affected regions. At the time when we strive for a dignified for life of all, the continued presence of war and the conflict not only devastates life but also deepens the gap between sustainable development goals and reality. Conflict destroys essential services such as education, healthcare, and economic system, leaving entire generation without opportunities for growth. For instance, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has left tens of thousands of children homeless and defenseless, making it region with the highest number of the children with disabilities per capita. Similarly, the war in Ukraine has displaced millions, including children who have been separated from their families and left without essential support system. Turkey has stepped forward to ensure the protection and well-being of these children by providing shelter, healthcare, education, psychological support, and family reunification services, creating a safe and nurturing environment for them to rebuild their lives. As Turkey, we believe that securing a future for children, youth, and girls in conflict zone rests on 3 key pillars. Aside from the services we provide for displaced children in our country, we also carry out numerous initiatives to ensure the well-being of our children. We provide comprehensive services to protect our support children, ensuring that every child grows up in a safe and lovely family environment. Through home-based care models, we provide individualized, continuous, and consistent support for each child. The strive to reunite children in institutional care with their biological families by supporting them through the social and economic support service. When necessary, we place children with foster families, ensuring they grow up in a nutrition family setting. Through the Children Are Safe program, we closely monitor at-risk children, providing early intervention for those working on the stress facing school, absenteeism, or the risk of neglect, abuse, and involvement in crime. Esteemed guests, as we approach the Second World Summit for Social Development, we must ensure that our policies prioritize children, youth, and girls in post-conflict recovery efforts. This means strengthening international legal frameworks to protect children and youth in conflict zones, expanding global education and healthcare initiatives to prevent future social inclusion, and changing multi-stakeholder partnership to build inclusive, resilient societies. The future of children is the future of the societies. If we fail to act now, we risk losing an entire generation to war, displacement, and the lost opportunities. While we discuss safeguarding the future of children, youth, and girls, we must also acknowledge the structural injustice and prolonged conflict that continue to fuel instability. The occupation held in Gaza and the West Bank violate fundamental human rights and international law. As Turkey, we strongly advocate for two-state solution where Palestine and Israel coexist within secure and recognized borders based on in 1967 lines. A just and lasting peace in region is the only part of stability and prosperity. Similarly, the reconstruction in war-torn countries such as Syria is crucial for the return of displaced communities and the restoration of dignity and to millions who have suffered from years of conflict. When it comes discussing the hardship caused by displacement, I would like to mention that Turkey hosts the largest number of displaced people in the world. We shoulder an immense humanitarian and economic burden. However, no country can be expected to carry such a responsibility alone. The international community must understand this reality and work harder to ensure that those who have lost everything are helped by everyone, not just a few. We have a responsibility to future generations to create a world where conflicts no longer shape the lives of children, youth, and girls. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your enlightening remarks and commitment to these critical issues. Now I'd like to give the floor to His Excellency, Ambassador Hamid Opeleora again, Permanent Observer of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the United Nations.
Thank you, Moderator. The panel discussion is entitled Safeguarding the Future, Addressing the Impacts of Conflict on Children, Youth, and Girls for Inclusive Socio-Economic Development. So the first thing we looked at is the fact that the disruption of lives and livelihood during the period of war and conflict is at the center of national and global discussion on socio-economic development. We look at it as these are part of the things that affect socio-economic development. In particular, the negative consequences of wars and conflict on women, youth, and girls are enormous, considering the vulnerable position of women and children within the global order. For example, records show that the war in Gaza has claimed the lives of more than 47,161 Palestinian civilian population, most of whom are women and children, with more than 111,166 injured people between 8th of October 2023 and 24th January 2025. In addition to the destruction of social infrastructure, including homes, schools, hospitals, places of worship, wars lead to forced displacement of the population, thereby compounding the unfavorable socio-economic conditions. This includes the outflow of refugees to neighboring countries, the issue of irregular immigration and migrant labor, and the increasing number of internally displaced persons in the crisis-affected countries slow down the socio-economic development in the various countries. So in this regard, the negative impacts of conflicts on women, youth, and children can be examined from the standpoint of the fact that the children are both involved in armed conflict. They use them for armed conflict. At the same time, they are also victims of armed conflict. So both at the demand side or the supply side, women and children are affected. So the youth and children suffer from forced recruitment as child soldiers, thereby subjecting them to extreme mental and physical harm. They are also victims of violence because women, youth, and children lose their lives and limbs in wartime, while the women become widows and the children become orphans. In addition to unemployment and extreme poverty, victims of war also suffer from erosion of educational opportunities. The schools are closed, they have to leave their countries, and then, of course, there is no economic opportunities anymore. They have to also leave to be refugees. So there's there's no trade within their countries, and they are also victims of war. So to address this, the efforts have now been directed to peace building and conflict prevention, management, and resolution. So the role of women and youth is very significant, considering the energy, the creativity, and the capacities of women and youth as change agents within an inclusive conflict resolution architecture. Because the more we have a climate whereby conflict can be resolved in an inclusive manner, where everybody you leave nobody behind, and that is what the UN says. So to this end, women and youth are traditionally effective in leading peace advocacy. They are also effective in disaster risk management. They are humanitarian relief operations. I remember the youth have also been very effective in mitigating the disaster that happened in many countries, including Turkey during the last earthquake. And so we have a lot of very dynamic role of youth and women in this situation. So at the UN, within the UN context, I mean, talking about the arrangement, which is the institutional arrangement by the UN, you have the SDG 10 and 17, which actually talks about reducing inequalities and at the same time partnership for achieving the goals. So there's also the Pact for the Future, which also talked about achieving greater equality and empowerment for all women and girls. The Pact also talks about protecting civilians in armed conflict. And also the Pact addresses investing in socio-economic development of children and young people, and of course protecting and respecting human rights of all young people, encouraging youth participation in peace building and development activities. So these are some of the institutional arrangements that the UN provided. And of course, there's also another document which came out of the Summit of the Future, and that is Declaration on Future Generations. Because we are talking about future generations, we are talking about sustainable development. So the declaration talks about inclusiveness of youth as change agents and to involve them in decision-making processes. So these are also some of the emphases that the UN has put in this regard. Within the OIC setting, you have the OIC Youth Strategy, which deals with youth protection in war times and deals with post-conflict period, during the wartime and during post-conflict period. And this strategy underscores giving priority to such sectors as education, youth employment, social inclusion, health services, youth organization and volunteering, including counter-terrorism and entrepreneurship. Of course, the ICYF is in the forefront of addressing all these programs, like volunteering, like issues of entrepreneurship. We also have the OIC Conference of Ministers and Youth, which held in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in September 2022. It expressed commitments to protecting youth against violence in armed conflict. So these are the policy framework. So in the area of actions, now we have the OIC Covenant on the Right of the Child, which stipulates that children must be protected against being involved in wars and conflicts. And we have issues of education and employment and unemployment. So these are the challenges. However, the women, youth, and girls suffer from repercussions of war, and so therefore the displacements of the civilian population leads to issues of migration and refugee status. Now, the OIC has concrete actions on promoting employment. And so, therefore, the recent takeoff of the OIC Labor Center, which is the newly established OIC specialized institution in Baku, Azerbaijan, is aimed at addressing the crucial role of employment, and they deal with this issue through their three key important activities. The first one is occupational safety and health, and the second one is public employment services network, and the third one is through the OIC framework for cooperation on labor. And of course, our other organization, a subsidiary organization in Ankara, which is CSocD63, also deals with some of this network. They have an host net, which is for occupational safety, and they have public employment services, PESNet, and we also have some of the issues concerning peace building and humanitarian relief. So the role of women in youth in peace building advocacy is also essential, and women have been identified as great peacemaking negotiators. And so therefore the OIC is also putting emphasis on this role in its own framework of action. And of course, we have the success of the youth volunteering program of ICYF. It's also relevant to showcasing the role of the youth in the post-war setting. Now we have the humanitarian intervention by national actors in the OIC countries, And these are also some of the things that the OIC has been involved in. Now, talking about innovative funding, the OIC and UNHCR has also used the Islamic social finance to fund projects in support of refugees and immigrants. So these are concrete actions that have been taken by the OIC. So in trying to round up my recommendations, it's believed that this session should be able to take note of the following: that the international community should accord greater priority to protecting women, youth, and girls from the disruptive effects of war and conflict. The second recommendation that we may also want to bring across to this session is that there is need to mainstream the role of women, young girls in peace building, peacemaking, and conflict prevention, management, and resolution. There's also the issue that to realize the SDG target by 2030 and objectives contained in the Pact for the Future, there is need to translate all these actions, all these commitments into concrete actions in the way of partnership, social inclusion, and gender balance. And then, of course, the various OIC institutions are also very eager to give expression to the various commitments towards promoting involvement of women in peace building and conflict prevention. And also, we should also scale up capacity development empowerment, and we should deepen youth-centered programs in the domain of science and technology. And so these are some of the recommendations that I wish to bring to the attention of this session. I thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you, Your Excellency, for your kind attendance, and thank you to the audience for your listening content. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your insightful reflections and very important recommendations and valuable contributions. Before we pass on to our next panelist,
Dear Chair and guests, I have to leave this meeting. I'm honored that with you to be here, but I have to flight. So can you let me?
Thank you for joining. Catch up. And then I'll give the floor to Sandra Pertek, who is a Future Leaders Fellow of UK Research and Innovation and a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Birmingham and working on forced migration context. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dear Excellencies and dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, I'm honored to be here and thank you for giving me the space to represent the voices of women from conflict and displacement zones that I've met over my research programs. 2024 is one of the worst years in history in children in conflict, according to UNICEF. They report that over 70 million children are currently displaced within their own countries or have migrated over borders in search of safety. There are more children on the move alone, or there are children with other children due to violence, war, poverty, and natural disasters than ever before. And they are subjected to the continued forms of violence, all different forms of intersecting oppressions, such as, obviously, gender-based violence, trafficking, mandatory conscriptions, but also recently we hear narratives of famine, such as in Sudan and Gaza, and ongoing separation from families, which results in severe lack of basic items and services. Children face protection risks, including physical, sexual, and gender-based violence, as I mentioned, which results in psychological distress, including witnessing domestic abuses and non-partner violence, for example, rape of women in conflict and transit. Children often witness the violence that women experience in conflict. In terms of causes, obviously, all these distressing events due to war or due to displacement processes cause in children high rates of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Accumulated stress, which often manifests in recurring illnesses, developmental delays, relationship breakdowns, poor educational performance, behavioral problems, and so on. But there is a wide body of research and knowledge that has shown that children that have access to appropriate child-focused support, including cultural and spiritual supports in times of crisis, can be supported and they can experience improvements in their mental and physical health. When we talk about children, I will like to focus on girls. Why? It's because they are disproportionately affected by existing gender inequalities in peace times, but also inequalities that exacerbate in times of conflict. So the needs of girls to representation, education, and skills development, and to safe spaces have been often overlooked, and gender mainstreaming strategies often marginalize girls by prioritizing gender quotas and including just women of different ages, overlooking girls of different ages too. I will just highlight a few unique risks that girls in displacement and conflict experience. So sexual violence as a weapon of war, increased household responsibilities, forcing them out of school, menstrual stigma, and lack of hygiene facilities that make their daily lives even harder. And many of them have been recoursing to early marriages or labor just to survive. So the scale of the needs of displaced children and girls exceeds the resources, capacities, and political will. And I'm very pleased that today we are prioritizing key issues on the agenda. And I'm sure this conversation feeds to a wider debate and global conversation on improving child-focused solutions in humanitarian settings, amongst others. I would like to focus now on 3 critical issues. So building on what I have just said, gender-based violence, but also now education, economic empowerment, health, hygiene, and menstrual justice. Without deny, we know there are hidden crises, the continuum of gender-based violence against girls. Sexual violence in conflict is not accidental. It is a strategy of war. We see it all over again in different contexts affected by conflict and conflicts such as in Sudan, the DRC, Ukraine. Girls have been abducted, raped, and trafficked by armed groups. The unaccompanied and separated children are trafficked, exploited, and abused. Displacement increases further risks of forced marriage and exploitation as families struggle to survive. Overcrowded camps without safe spaces make girls even more vulnerable to assault, and family separation heightens the risks that I have just mentioned. Yet, despite all these risks, less than 1% of humanitarian aid is dedicated to protection, gender-based violence prevention, and response. Now, there are some things that work. Obviously, there is lots of positive outputs that support children on the move and children in conflict. Some of them that I would like to highlight are the route-based programming approaches that support children on the move, offering life-saving and family reunification, as provided by many Red Cross and Red Cross Crescent societies. There are also faith-sensitive mental health and psychosocial support programs that are essential to support children's coping by drawing on what's familiar to them, the values, perhaps the spirituality or religion, and trauma-informed care, when adapted to cultural and religious needs, have been documented that can build on existing resources and capacities of children and help them recover support in some ways. But we need to see increases in protection funding. There is still the investment that is put in child protection and GBV prevention is insufficient, and diverse partnerships here are key to put children at the heart of humanitarian response. Also, as a duty of care, humanitarian actors must ensure that all partners are sensitized on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse and violence against children. When it comes to treating child survivors, they all deserve particular attention, survivor-centered approach, by accounting for their specific needs at the best interest of the child. And child protection specialists obviously should be consulted regarding offering help to children on the move or in conflict. Now, going to education, I hope I will not run out of time, but please urge me if I do. Education is a lifeline, but only if girls can access it. We probably all are aware that conflict forces girls out of school at twice the rate of boys. As extensively reported in Sudan, Afghanistan, and northern Nigeria, for example, millions of girls have lost their right to education. Household duties increase, making school a distant priority, and when schools are destroyed, boys' education is prioritized over girls. But there are things that work, for example, alternative learning spaces and mobile schools, digital platforms, and community-led education that can ensure continuity when formal schools collapse. There are also economic support, all sorts of economic support programs. What I know of that are effective are conditional cash transfers and stipends for girls that help ease financial pressures that push them into early marriage or child labor. There are also vocational training programs for displaced girls, and faith-based and local community-based initiatives can provide safe economic pathways, preventing trafficking and exploitation. In terms of health, hygiene, and menstrual justice, these are kind of unseen crises. Menstrual health is a human rights issue, but in conflict settings, it becomes a life-altering barrier. Again, going back to Gaza and Sudan, girls lack access to sanitary products, water, and private toilets, forcing them to stay home or use unsafe alternatives. Menstrual stigma isolates girls, leading to school dropouts and further marginalization. And without improved hygiene, girls' infections and long-term health complications result. What works in this context? Dignity kits in every humanitarian response. Menstrual products must be treated as essential aid, and safe spaces and menstrual education is also something that can be implemented to challenge harmful cultural taboos that prevent girls from fully participating in society. Investing in women-led health initiatives, such as local women's organizations who know women's and girls' needs best, should receive more direct funding. We cannot ignore menstrual health issues. Now, moving on to a little bit different topics. So we already heard a lot from respected Ambassador Hamid about the role of the OIC. So some of my research, I've done lots of research studies. I looked at the role of the OIC, and I just wanted to add a few components of why the organization is so relevant in the international system to support and prioritize displaced women's and children's protection and inclusion. And the reason why I do that is because we need to shift into beyond West-centric approaches into regional solutions and initiatives of various regional bodies, such as the OIC, that have their own relevant mechanisms, such as the OIC Action Plan for Empowerment of Women, OPAW, that was already mentioned, but as well as such as Ashgabat Declaration, which is proposing specific measures to support displaced people in the Muslim-majority countries. However, yet this declaration overlooks issues of women and children. So there is a very compelling pragmatic and value-based case for the OIC to draw on faith traditions to prioritize the inclusion and protection of displaced women. And the OIC Charter, Article 14 itself, states the objectives of the OIC are to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the rights of women and children, youth, elderly, and people with special needs, as well as the preservation of Islamic family values. There are multiple efforts that have been already mentioned by esteemed OIC Ambassador Hamid. In addition, I wanted to add that there is in progress developed a draft OIC Jeddah Convention on child rights. In overview, there are multiple cultural resolutions that refer frequently to promoting Islamic values and the institution of family, and through addressing violence against women and girls, for example. There is lots of references to different values, such as Islamic solidarity, and the Council of Foreign Ministers announced the 1st of October to be an Islamic Solidarity Day with women and children victims of wars and occupation in the Islamic world. This is in effect, it was announced in 2022. Yeah. The OIC has instituted committees like the Joint Advisory Committee for Family Affairs, Women and Children, and the OIC strategy for empowerment of marriage and family institutions, many of which obviously require further implementation and increased distribution of resources for effective implementation. Here, again, just building on what was already said, we need to tap into new financing models to ensure that the new resources are generated to support increasing needs of children in conflict and displacement. It's important to consider, for example, the potential of Islamic social finance in supporting conflict-affected children, looking at instruments such as zakat, waqf, and sadaqah that do and can even further fund education, mental health, and protection programs for refugee children. So now, let me conclude slowly. We need to strengthen a joint responsibility for displaced children. So given that there are so many interesting resources provided by regional organizations and the UN wider framework, especially the SDGs framework, now it is very important for all these actors to strengthen and align their efforts in order to ensure long-term support for displaced children and children in conflict zones in order to support initiatives such as safe learning spaces, family reunification, child protection, mental health and psychosocial support, as well as education programs. Recommendations from my side would be, if I may, just the last minute, this is a global responsibility, not just a humanitarian issue. We all know that. And it's so crucial to prioritize displaced children's protection, education, and psychological well-being for many years to come. Girls in conflict are not just passive victims, they are survivors, leaders, and change makers. And if we invest in them, we are investing in peace, stability, and future beyond war. There's obviously so many things that should happen: enhancing accountability mechanisms, translating policy commitments into action, increasing capacity of various actors to ensure safety systems for unaccompanied and separated children especially. And we need to improve coordination between and within Muslim and mainstream international humanitarian agencies to maximize impact and meet the growing humanitarian needs of children in global displacement. This is non-negotiable priority in humanitarian funding. New initiatives are needed as well, tailored to provide specialized support for displaced children, survivors of violence, leveraging, for example, Islamic social finance. We need more and more child-friendly spaces across forced migration routes, and we should mainstream child sensitivity in policy and practice. So I think I will end here. Thank you for the opportunity to intervene. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Pertek. Those are very important issues, and and we can bring them up and we can revisit them during the questions and answer session. I'd like to welcome His Excellency Dr. Philip Poljar from the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs. Welcome. So I may give the floor to you. Thank you.
Here. Right. Good afternoon, and for those that are following us virtually, might be midnight or morning somewhere. So first of all, thank you, and I'm sorry I was not through the whole of the activity, but the truth is that this was like a last-minute confirmation. Thankful to my friend Taha for the invitation to be here. But I was already committed to something before, and that's why I came a little bit late. But I'm grateful that I have the chance to join at least for some minutes in this space, because I think the invitation given to all of us by the Islamic Cooperation Youth Forum and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and all the partners that participated is definitely a necessary and a crucial dialogue at this house in the United Nations, you know. So thank you, Dr. Pertek, for bringing facts to the discussion in relation to the impact that conflicts and economic disruption bring, especially when it's about children, youth, and women. But thank you also for ending your intervention, also reminding all of us that the discussion is not only about resilience, but it's about also empowerment, inclusion, and ensuring that young people, especially, and young women are brought into the table when it's about building peace. Conflicts disrupt education, disrupt health services, and impact the economic opportunities. And that's why conflicts deepen the cycles of poverty and inequality. The challenges that young people face today related to forced displacement, to economic exclusion, and the threats to education and their well-being in all their dimensions. And that's why in the proposed topics for discussion, a big part of this has to do with mental health, not only in terms of mental health support, but also all the preventive actions that need to be taken in relation to the future. But we cannot separate the discussions in relation to conflict and development. And I have the chance every day. I am here and I come to the office and I walk from the bus stop to my office, and there's a sign in the wall of UNDP's headquarters that reminds me about this every day, you know, because it says there's no peace without development, and there's not development without peace, you know, and that's the truth we are talking about. So we cannot talk about safeguarding the future if we don't address the realities that children, youth, and girls in conflict face today. You know, our Secretary General has been extremely vocal about the importance and the necessity of ending with the current humanitarian crisis in relation to conflict. But I want to be also hopeful about this, because I strongly believe that things can be different. And a key for making this change is really about the engagement of young people, the engagement of women. Youth are not just victims, they are also agents of change. And currently, many young people are already leading when it's about peace building, leading when it's about recovery efforts, leading in terms of community development. But the truth is that the barriers are coming from institutions. The Secretary General's report on youth, peace and security, that every 2 years he's mandated to present to the Security Council, reflects that the amount of young people involved when it's about political missions mandates, when it's about peacekeeping operations mandate in relation to the Security Council resolution is now less than before. So even though we've advanced structurally in a change in the global narrative about the importance of including young people, after 10 years of having the first resolution of the Security Council about the involvement of young people in peace and security, we are left behind where we should be. So I hope that this year, where we will be also recognizing and celebrating the brave role that many years back, under the leadership of Jordan, under the presence of Jordan in the Security Council, the UN approved for the first time a resolution bringing the importance of young people involvement in peace building. So I hope that this year is also then an opportunity to look to the future for change, you know. And that this is completely interlinked with the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future. You know, last year, and Dr. Pertek was bringing data about that, you know, it's a very complex year in terms of the impact of conflicts in people's life, and especially for children, youth, and women. But also in terms of multilateralism, something hopeful happened, you know, because all the member states of this organization came together and they agreed on something. And that in the middle of such an amount of uncertainties is something not to take for granted, you know. But now it's about how we put that in practice and how we advance on those commitments, you know. And the importance of putting in practice the structural part of this pact in relation to young people, which is about trust building, which is about building trust and the inclusion of young people in decision making, has to do with implementations at many levels. It's not about only what the UN entities can do, you know, because the UN is a convener at the end of it, you know. It's a multilateral platform where governments, where different parts of the UN system come, but also civil society, private sector, regional institutions come together. So it's about how we can, in relation to that common agenda, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, this new proposal for the future of multilateralism, we can put into practice and translate this into concrete commitments in relation to prioritize education, to prioritize mental health support and economic opportunities in relation to building development, and of course, most importantly, in post-conflict recovery processes. So I think my reflection here is really about let's trust more in young people, because things can be different. And I think that young people are leading by example and showing us that things can be different, that dialogue is possible, that peace is possible. But the truth is that the only way of achieving this pact for the future, the only way of achieving those resolutions on the Security Council that stands about the importance of young people involvement in peace and security is through collaboration, is through that Sustainable Development Goal number 17 that talks about the importance of engaging international organizations, of course the UN, but regional bodies, civil society, and mainly young people through youth-led organizations. Empowering youth, it's about securing a peaceful and just tomorrow. Thank you, Taha, again, for inviting me to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you for these insightful reflections and the connection between conflict and development and how youth can actually make a change. Those are very important issues, and we can discuss during our questions and answers session part. Now, last but not least, let us give the floor to Ms. Bella Sullivan. She's the director of the McGill Youth Advisor Delegation and a dedicated advocate for youth. And she has been instrumental in amplifying youth voices and fostering intersectional approaches to sustainable development and human rights. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for your moderation and for the ICYF and OIC for having me and including me in the panel today. As director of a youth-led organization advocating at the United Nations, I want to begin by acknowledging that I don't speak from lived experience in conflict zones. However, as young people engaged in global advocacy, we recognize our responsibility to stand in solidarity with youth who are directly affected by violence, displacement, and systematic injustice. Their voices must be at the center of decision-making, and our role is to amplify their calls for justice and meaningful change. Conflict is like an earthquake. its impact is immediate, devastating, and impossible to ignore. But what happens in the aftermath is just as critical. When buildings collapse, people don't just die from the initial destruction. They die waiting for rescue, for food, and for shelter. They die because the systems meant to respond are too slow, too politicized, or too indifferent. Right now in Gaza, it's in the rubble of an ongoing catastrophe. With over half of its population displaced and humanitarian aid blocked, young people are not just victims of war, but of international inaction. According to OCHA, entire generations are losing access to education, healthcare, and a future. And yet, the response from global leaders has been hesitation rather than urgency. In Latin America, the demolition looks different, but the outcome is just as devastating. The UNHCR reports that the displacement is at an all-time high, as youth flee cartel violence, authoritarian crackdowns, and gender-based persecution. But rather than offering refuge, the United States has built legal and physical barriers to shut them out. The Trump administration in particular escalated the crisis with mass deportations, family separations, and policies like the Remain in Mexico program, which has stranded asylum seekers in dangerous conditions. And these aren't policy failures, these are intentional acts of cruelty, designed to dismantle protections for displaced people while fueling xenophobic narratives. As U.S. aid programs that support stability in the region are slashed, the U.S. continues to enforce restrictive immigration policies while ignoring the conditions it helped create. Luckily, young people are already making unique and significant contributions to peace building, yet their voices are often marginalized and ignored in political processes. One of the most persistent and damaging misconceptions about youth is that they're more susceptible to violence. However, empirical evidence such as the UN's The Missing Peace study debunks this myth. Instead of being at risk or in need of management, young people, especially those in conflict-prone areas, are often the ones who take proactive and peaceful action in the face of adversity. Unfortunately, political leaders often view youth critical of government action as threats, labeling them as terrorists or participants in violent extremism. This is not only silencing youth, but also leads to repressive policies that further exclude them from the civic space. Such exclusion has far-reaching effects, including the suppression of peaceful organizing by youth. The reality is that young people in conflict areas are often the most motivated to foster peace. In places like Yemen, young adults are creating alternative networks to counter extremism, using media, theater, and human rights advocacy to protect their peers and build resilient communities. This level of agency and commitment to peace building is far too often overlooked by the international community, particularly because youth-led efforts are severely underfunded. A survey from the UN Progress Study found that half of youth-led organizations operate on less than $5,000 USD per year, making it nearly impossible for their work to scale. This situation stands in stark contrast to the scale of global investments in arms. While states often talk about the importance of peace building, the reality is that billions of dollars are spent on arms and military infrastructure, with much less allocated to the prevention of conflict or the dismantling of weapons. In 2020, global military spending reached a staggering $1.98 trillion, compared to a much smaller sum directed towards disarmament efforts. This discrepancy reveals a clear prioritization of military solutions over nonviolent approaches, despite widespread understanding that peace building is crucial for long-term stability. The focus on military spending not only undermines peace efforts, but also perpetrates the cycle of violence that young people are often left to cope with. This is where the Youth, Peace, and Security Agenda becomes a vital step forward at the United Nations. These are, at their core, peace-building efforts, working to eliminate the root causes of violence and injustice. The YPS agenda provides a wonderful framework for recognizing these efforts, allowing young people to be included in global peacemaking processes and to see themselves as stakeholders in shaping a more just world. The international community must do more than just listen. It must make space for youth to lead. The real question is, are governments ready to have them at the table? The YPS agenda is an important step in the right direction, but its success truly depends on continued advocacy and the sustained commitment to integrating youth at every level of decision-making. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Selvin, for your inspiring words and your dedication to advancing youth-led solutions in global governance. So, to summarize very briefly before we move on with the questions and answers sessions, almost all of the panelists touched upon the very important and intertwined nature of the dually existing connection between the victim role of youth and women and also the influential side of the agency of youth, women in post-conflict situations in development, advocacy, and inclusion. So there's, on the one hand, there's this agency side, and also how children and youth and women can be the solution, not only they are passive victims, through their engagement in peace building, peace development, and how within their capacity can actually make change. But also there is also a structural and organizational component where the connection of development and well-being of communities, if they were giving assistance, by organizational support and institutional support, and there can be more interactions when there's different organizations working together. So I'd like to thank all our panelists, distinguished panelists, for their insightful remarks. So I will open the floor for audience engagement, where this is an opportunity to share your insights, comments, questions, and provide further recommendations. Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Pertek. Dr. Pertek has mentioned how where wars happen, schools get destroyed, and therefore girls can't get education, since when schools are rebuilt, those educations are prioritized for boys. And by that, she also mentions an alternative as an online education. However, when wars happen, some digital facilities, they get destroyed, and the internet is not accessible. So I want to know how Dr. Pertek thinks about this situation. How can girls get more access to online and education through online? Thank you.
Yes, or will you collect other questions? Oh, thank you. That's a very pertinent observation. Absolutely, digital access is limited in many places, but in some it's very much accessible. It depends on the context, so we need to obviously have a contextualized approaches. There are alternative ways of education, peer education, and informal educational networks that work in other places. I'm not an expert on education, so I can't really elaborate much further, but indeed, even as we learned during the pandemic times, that digital injustice affected access to education of many of us, right? In many countries, we could see that some people have been excluded, and the marginalization of some communities has exacerbated. And it's very relevant for children in conflict and displacement in different countries, not only the developing world or low and middle income countries, but even in the high income countries that we have seen many children excluded from education because of lack of access to internet data. Yeah. Is that sufficient, or would you like me to elaborate further? Okay.
Any other panelists like to contribute to the well-being, digital well-being, and the connection between post-conflict areas? Yes, Mr. Ahmed.
Yes, I think the issue of digital really is about dislocation. When there is war, the community is dislocated, and so therefore sometimes one of those things that will be some emergency preparations, arrangements will have to be made to take care of the internally displaced persons. Because the IDPs also, normally, you make sure that they have some communication, although sometimes it's very erratic, but you can provide for them while they are taking shelter in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, let me take the role as a moderator, ask the panelists the question of what collective actions can prioritize children and youth in post-conflict recovery plans? Can you also share any other examples while we're discussing related issues based on our panelists' discussions? Any other examples that can be used as a recommendation from the examples of the UN and also OIC, ICYF? depends. Your mic is on, so maybe you were given.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, first of all. I think these are the last words of mine for the panel. For everyone who come here and allocate their time, I hope the discussions and consultations in this session, which I enjoy very much, will be fruitful. First of all, understanding the post-conflict zones. Unfortunately, we are witnessing conflicts and post-conflict zones by ourselves in a time, and we can take so many lessons from the aftermath zones. But I think the most prioritized thing is that the stakeholders, especially the states and the intergovernmental organizations, starting from the United Nations and its agencies, should focus on providing the shelter and providing the minimum standards of the living for the conflict-affected people at the conflict zone, if possible. Otherwise, in case of the displacement, we can see that the demographical changes may make some unrepairable hurts to the society and to the countries, as we have witnessed in Libya and Syria. Now we are witnessing in Gaza. But of course, it's not possible always. And then if it's not possible, at least the stakeholders, starting from the states and the international intergovernmental organizations, shall focus on providing the humanitarian aid, providing the shelter, and providing the minimum living standards for the people who had affected, who have immigrated from the conflict zones, as we have witnessed in the Syrian case. Since the Syrian case, I mean, I'm referencing to the Syrian case because it's very vital for the moment. It's very livable for the moment. Since Turkey provides shelter to the people who had migrated from the Syria due to the conflict, now the people of Syria are returning back to the country to redevelop their countries. But in other cases, once the diaspora has been created in third countries, they're living difficulty to return back to the country, which creates huge demographical changes, and I mean it is affecting the future of that countries as well. And in Palestine case, or in Rohingya case, or in Sudan case, I think the whole international organizations, international community should focus on future of these countries with the native population of these countries to provide enough services, standards to be sure that the native people will continue to live lives in their respective countries. So these are the things that I can say. And thank you very much for the question. And thank you very much for our speaker.
Thank you very much. I think, yes.
Thank you. Yes, I think all has been said, but I want to look at the practice of the UN, of United Nations. There's an emphasis that they put on peace building and conflict prevention. I think it's more important to see how women and girls can be very effective in making sure that conflicts do not occur. And so therefore the Peace Building Commission has been doing a lot of good work. And so peace building is a way of either negotiation, using women as in peacemaking, and when there are some problems within the community. So before they generate into complete breakdown of peace, that approach has been very, very effective. And I think with women and girls, this is very potent in ensuring that we have sustainable peace That's the idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other distinguished panelists would like to contribute? Yes.
I'll be sure to keep it short because I know our time is coming to an end. But I'm coming from the context of being involved in negotiations through Canada, but I want to recognize that community efforts in peace building and a bottom-up approach is crucial. But currently, we're seeing a serious backsliding in agreed language at the United Nations, specifically at the Commission on the Status of Women. That's coming up next month. With the recent election, member states should not only improve agreed language, but ensure that we don't go back on what we have been advocating for the past 30 years. Specifically on what Dr. Pertek has talked about, especially about violence against women in post-conflict zones, menstrual hygiene and management, and reproductive justice. As young people that we don't have much resources or agency in getting involved in negotiations. Well, we definitely do try, but we are really relying on member states right now to protect what we have fought for so long. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Pertek.
Just 1 minute more. I know everyone is tired. And there is a question? Yes. Or comment? I should prioritize you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hello. Okay. Hi, my name is Mira, and so first of all, I thank all of the panelists here to address the issue of conflicted areas, especially for youth, children, and women. And thanks to Dr. Philip for bringing up about the youth, that trust in youth, they can prove it, they can involve in peace and security. And thanks to Dr. Patrick for bringing the women menstrual cycle hygiene issue. And so my question here is, how can humanitarian aid and programs designed to prioritize the need of young people? I've been hearing many times about the aids for women and children, but how about the youth? Any specific program ongoing or, yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Will. But allow me, I will give the floor to someone that is much more the expert on this, and who is Godfrey Alumai, who works in our office, and during last 4 years before joining our office, he was working in the ground in the office of the resident coordinator in South Sudan, where he's from. So I think it's better to hear it from him, and he's very involved in the process of the humanitarian compact. So.
Thank you for the opportunity. On this specific question, again, my name is Godfrey. I work with the UN Youth Office with Dr. Felipe. On the question of how can we make humanitarian aid more responsive to youth issues and the rest of it, I mean, there are stages that you need to look at. One of the key things is to ensure that at the time of the analysis to try to come out with your humanitarian response plan within a country, that your humanitarian overview has a very good sort of breakdown or disaggregation of the different vulnerable communities that are being affected by the humanitarian crisis in the country. Once you don't get that right in terms of the disaggregation at the time of the planning or the analysis stage, you'll miss out in terms of the different target groups to sort of focus on. And many times you find that we will look at how many children are affected, how many women are affected, how many men are affected, but then you don't go down to the edge sort of disaggregation, and that's how sometimes it gets lost. So the analysis, and then that translates into the targeting, and also at the targeting stage, it is important to really engage the youth during the time, consulting the youth or the different stakeholders during the time of developing the humanitarian response plan, to ensure that the needs, what are the key issues that they're really facing, comes out at that stage. Because once you miss that, you will be pegging your sort of humanitarian targets against some of the things that will not have come out during the consultation. So the consultative process